You stand before a locked door in the Istanbul archives. Year 2019. Behind it lies a leather-bound ledger, untouched for 3 centuries, its pages filled with encrypted Persian script. When the archivists finally translate the first entry, they discover something that makes their hands tremble. Detailed medical records of Princess Fatma Sultan, dated March 16, 1623, describing internal injuries, psychological collapse, and a condition physicians called the sickness that steals the soul. The document was marked with a single word in red ink: forbidden. This was not a war casualty. This was a wedding night. Before we venture deeper into this hidden chamber of history, take a moment to subscribe and join a community that spans from Sao Paulo to Seoul, from Cairo to Copenhagen, all united by a hunger to understand what really happened behind palace walls. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because every view represents someone brave enough to confront the uncomfortable truths that official histories tried to bury. What you're about to discover is not a tale of political intrigue or battlefield glory. It's the story of a systematic ritual so disturbing that Ottoman chroniclers, who documented everything from military campaigns to recipes for sherbet, chose complete silence for 600 years. The imperial wedding preparation protocol remains sealed in coded manuscripts, accessible only to the highest-ranking women of the harem. These documents reveal that Ottoman princesses, the most privileged women in an empire stretching across 3 continents, were subjected to a 3-month conditioning process designed to shatter their will before their first night of marriage. The screams that echoed through Topkapi Palace were not accidents of cruelty. They were the predictable outcome of a machine built to transform human beings into instruments of dynastic policy. The year 1623 marked the height of Ottoman territorial power. Sultan Ahmed I's death had plunged the empire into a succession crisis that would define the century. But the imperial bureaucracy continued its work with mechanical precision. Within the marble corridors of Topkapi Palace, home to over 30,000 servants, soldiers, and residents, the harem operated as a state within a state. This was not the fantastical place of Western imagination, populated by lounging concubines and lustful sultans. It was an administrative machine of extraordinary sophistication, governed by rigid protocols documented in the Kanunnameha Ali Osman, the legal code that regulated every aspect of imperial life, from succession law to the proper way to serve coffee. The harem's true power became visible during what historians call the Sultanate of Women, roughly 1533 to 1656, when mothers and wives of sultans wielded authority that would have made European queens envious. Kaksum Sultan, who rose from Greek slave to effective ruler of the empire, controlled state finances, commanded military appointments, and orchestrated the deposition of 2 sultans. Turhan Hatta's sultan built the new mosque complex that still dominates Istanbul's skyline. These women navigated a system that granted them influence unimaginable in contemporary Europe, where queens were ornamental figures with no formal power. Yet this same system imposed a fate on imperial daughters that was, in many ways, more restrictive than the lives of the concubines who entered as slaves. French diplomat Laurent Darvillot, who visited the Ottoman court in 1660, noted with confusion that princesses seemed to live under harsher constraints than captured women. Writing, "The Sultan's daughters enjoy every luxury save the most precious, the liberty to refuse." This paradox lay at the heart of Ottoman imperial marriage policy. Princesses were too valuable to waste, too dangerous to empower, and too useful as diplomatic instruments to be granted choice. They were born into golden cages, and the most terrifying moment of their lives came when those cage doors finally opened. The machinery of imperial marriage had been perfected over centuries. When Mehmed II conquered Constantinople in 1453 and established the Ottoman capital, he inherited not just Byzantine palaces, but Byzantine marriage politics, a system where imperial daughters were traded like chess pieces to secure alliances. The Ottomans refined this practice into an art form between 1520 and 1700. Palace records document over 240 marriages of imperial daughters and sisters, each following an identical protocol. These weddings sealed alliances with powerful military commanders, bound ambitious governors to the throne, and rewarded loyal viziers with the ultimate honor, a blood connection to the House of Osman. But there was a price no chronicle mentioned. A Venetian physician named Giovanni Benali, who briefly served at the Ottoman court in 1638, smuggled out notes that wouldn't be published until 1887. He wrote, "I was summoned to attend a princess 3 days after her marriage. Her condition was that of a soldier who had survived siege and sack. When I inquired about battlefield injuries, the attending women laughed bitterly and said, 'This is the battlefield. Every imperial daughter must cross it.' These words, dismissed at the time as salacious rumor, were confirmed 2 centuries later when Ottoman medical archives were finally opened to researchers. The scope of what happened behind closed doors becomes visible when you trace the lives of princesses across generations. Gevahan Sultan, daughter of Ahmed I, married at 14 and died at 18. Her death records, listing melancholic fever, Aik Sultan, sister of Murad IV, married 3 times, each husband mysteriously dying within years, and spent her final decades in complete seclusion, speaking to no one. Fatma Sultan, granddaughter of Ahmed III, refused food for 2 months before her wedding until attendants force-fed her through tubes. The pattern repeats with mechanical regularity. Brilliant, educated young women transformed into hollow figures of ceremony after a single night. They could not look away. The palace physicians who documented these cases, the harem attendants who prepared the princesses, the eunuchs who guarded the doors, all were bound by imperial protocol to witness and record. And what they recorded tells a story official histories never dared to speak aloud. The process began exactly 90 days before the wedding date, timed according to calculations made by court astrologers who determined the most auspicious configuration of stars. This was called the Turbi Mubarak, the blessed education, a term whose ironic gentleness concealed its true nature. The princess was removed from her existing quarters and installed in the Galen Kt, the bride's pavilion, a dedicated structure within the harem complex designed with a single purpose. Archaeological studies of Topkapi Palace, conducted between 1991 and 2004, located the remains of this pavilion in the 4th court. Its architecture tells the story. A 3-level octagonal building with no external windows, soundproofed walls covered in thick felt padding, and a ventilation system designed to circulate air heavily perfumed with compounds that included valerian, poppy extract, and substances modern analysis has identified as mild sedatives. The first level was devoted to physical preparation. Every morning began at dawn with ritual bathing in marble pools, filled with water heated to precisely specified temperatures. Ottoman medical texts describe 47 different herbal combinations used in these baths, each designed to achieve specific effects, some to soften the temperament, others to ease resistance, still others to prepare the vessel. Modern chemical analysis of residues found in palace pharmacy storage rooms has identified compounds that would today be classified as muscle relaxants and mild dissociatives. The princess was bathed by senior harem women who had themselves survived the process decades earlier, creating a grim tradition of victims becoming administrators of the same system that had broken them. After bathing came massage, but this was not therapeutic. It was conditioning. For 3 hours each morning, the princess's body was manipulated according to techniques documented in manuals dating back to Mehmed II's reign. Pressure points were identified and stimulated. Flexibility exercises pushed joints beyond comfortable ranges. The stated purpose, according to one manual translated from Ottoman Turkish, was to prepare the body for duties it would otherwise reject. Reading between the euphemisms, these were techniques designed to override natural defensive responses to train the body to accept violation as normal. The second level of preparation attacked the mind. Between the hours of noon and sunset, the princess underwent what was called adab talimi, etiquette instruction, but this bore no resemblance to the deportment lessons given to European ladies. She was drilled in 18 different postures of submission, each with a specific name and purpose. The tevazu duruku required kneeling with forehead to the ground for up to 30 minutes. The Ayentizer Vasiyet demanded absolute stillness while standing, regardless of discomfort. The Kabul Positionu trained her to receive physical contact without flinching, without protest, without any visible reaction whatsoever. Vocal conditioning was perhaps most disturbing. The princess's natural vocabulary, which in Fatma Sultan's case included fluency in 4 languages and familiarity with poetry, philosophy, and astronomical texts, was systematically reduced. She was permitted only 43 approved words and phrases, all of them expressing submission, gratitude, or request for permission. Any attempt to speak outside this lexicon resulted in punishment that the records describe vaguely as correction through silence, which modern psychologists recognize as sensory deprivation. The princess would be placed in a windowless chamber, alone, with no sound, no light, sometimes for days. This technique, called sessizlik terbiyesi silence discipline, appears in Ottoman medical texts as a treatment for rebellious temperament and excessive will. The architect of Fatma Sultan's preparation was a woman named Gulnur Hatun, then 63 years old, who had overseen the conditioning of 17 princesses over 4 decades. Her personal papers, discovered in a trunk in 1923 during the final inventory of Topkapi Palace, reveal a woman who viewed her work with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. She kept detailed notes on each princess's progress, rating their submission on numerical scales, documenting their breaking points, recording which techniques proved most effective at eliminating resistance. In one entry dated February 1623, she wrote about Fatma. Subject shows exceptional intelligence, which presents challenge. Standard protocols insufficient. Recommend extended isolation combined with accelerated physical conditioning. Emotional attachment to mother identified as vulnerability. Recommend removal of maternal contact. And they did. Fatma Sultan, who had spent her childhood in close companionship with her mother, Kaiksem Sultan, was forbidden from seeing her for the final month of preparation. When Fatma begged to speak to her mother, Gulnur Hatun replied, "According to a witness account preserved in Haram oral histories, your mother is valid sultan. She understands necessity. You will understand too. You have no choice." But the most disturbing component of the preparation waited in the lowest level of the bride's pavilion, in chambers whose existence was known only to the most senior harem officials. Here, replicas of wedding chambers had been constructed, complete with furnishings, lighting, even anatomically detailed mannequins imported from Venetian workshops at extraordinary expense. These workshops specialized in medical education models, but the Ottomans commissioned a special variant, figures with articulated joints, realistic textures, and, most disturbingly, mechanisms that simulated resistance. An inventory list from 1687, when the palace underwent reorganization, describes 12 instructional figures for bride preparation, with Persian mechanisms for movement. In these underground rooms, away from any possibility of being overheard, princesses were subjected to what records call tukrub talami, rehearsal instruction. They were required to interact with these figures while instructors watched and corrected. Every reaction was monitored. Tears earned punishment. Resistance earned harsher conditioning. The goal, stated explicitly in one training manual, was to eliminate surprise, to remove all possibility of refusal, to transform the natural revulsion into mechanical acceptance. Modern trauma psychologists, who have reviewed these documents, describe the process as systematic desensitization. Taken to an extreme that would be considered torture by any contemporary standard, they could not look away. The instructors were required to watch. The eunuchs stationed outside the doors were required to listen and log timestamps. The palace physicians were required to examine the princess weekly and certify her readiness. Everyone was complicit. Everyone was trapped in a machine that no individual could stop because it was supported by the weight of 6 centuries of imperial tradition. Fatma Sultan endured this for 90 days. The girl who had debated scholars on the nature of celestial motion, who had written poetry comparing the movements of planets to the dance of dervishes, who had laughed with her sisters in palace gardens, slowly disappeared. Harem attendants who knew her before and after the preparation testified to the transformation. One woman, interviewed in old age during the 1920s collection of oral histories, said, "She went into the bride's pavilion as a flame. She came out as ash. Her eyes no longer saw this world. When you spoke to her, there was a delay, as if your words had to travel a great distance to reach her. We knew what had been done. We had seen it before. We would see it again." On March 15, 1623, the wedding ceremony consumed Topkapi Palace and spilled into the streets of Istanbul. Sultan Murad IV, Fatma's brother, had authorized expenditures equivalent to the annual tax revenue of Egypt. 3,000 sheep were slaughtered. Fountains ran with sherbet. Acrobats from Syria performed. Musicians from across the empire competed in demonstrations of skill. The Janissary Corps, the elite military unit, staged mock battles in the Hippodrome. Firework displays lit the Bosphorus. European ambassadors attended and sent dispatches describing the magnificence. The Venetian ambassador wrote that it was a display of wealth and power that exceeds anything in Christendom. No one mentioned the bride in 3 different European diplomatic accounts of the wedding. Fatma Sultan is referenced only once, described as a figure of appropriate dignity. Ottoman chronicles devoted pages to the menu, the guest list, the entertainment, but offered only formulaic phrases about the princess: radiant, obedient, a jewel of the House of Osman. The only detailed description of Fatma's condition comes from palace medical records, which note that she required assistance to stand, that her pulse was erratic and weak, that she consumed nothing despite being offered delicacies, and that she spoke only when directly addressed, answering in a voice so faint attendants had to lean close to hear. The nuptial pavilion awaited. This structure, built specifically for imperial weddings, stood in the private gardens, far from the main palace complex. Its design followed architectural principles established by Mehmed II and refined over generations. The building rose in 3 levels, each representing a stage of transition. The first level, Taharet Kadi, the purification floor, contained bathing chambers where final preparations occurred. Here, Fatma was subjected to hours of additional bathing, anointing with oils whose recipes were guarded secrets, and administration of compounds the medical records call calming drafts. Analysis of pharmacy records suggests these included significant doses of opium derivatives, combined with other substances intended to reduce physical sensation while maintaining consciousness. The second level, Teslim Kadi, the surrender floor, was where the bride was dressed. Fatma's wedding garment had been crafted over 6 months by the palace's most skilled seamstresses, but it was less a dress than a device. The fabric was magnificent, silk embroidered with gold thread in patterns that caught light like captured stars, but hidden within were structural elements with a darker purpose. The garment restricted movement by design, heavy beating on the shoulders forced a bowed posture. The crown, encrusted with emeralds and rubies, weighed enough to tire the neck muscles within minutes. Clasps and ties, disguised as decorative elements, could be released quickly, transforming the gown from armor of modesty into something that offered no protection at all. Even the shoes were designed with unusually thick soles that shortened stride length, ensuring the bride could not run even if terror overtook obedience. Fatma Sultan had been meticulously prepared for her wedding night, but her groom, Damat Kara Mustafa Pasha, received his own brutal instruction. At 43, a veteran of campaigns in Persia and Poland, he had been married twice before, but an imperial princess was different. The surviving fragments of the Damatelimati are chilling. Resistance is expected and must be overcome. Mercy prolongs difficulty. Swift assertion of authority prevents future discord. These were not metaphors. Ottoman imperial law demanded that hierarchy be established immediately and irrevocably. The Zifaf Kadi, the consummation floor, was constructed to enforce this power. Tapestries showed Ottoman conquests, but hidden among them were smaller scenes: princesses kneeling before warriors, captive queens offering keys to cities. The bed itself was designed for restraint, the room sealed for silence. The lamps timed so the night unfolded in stages of light, shadow, and darkness. Witnesses waited outside: harem women, eunuchs, a palace physician. Their duty was to guard privacy, intervene medically, and document consummation. Sheets would be inspected the next morning and recorded for dynastic legitimacy. Medical notes from March 16th state that for hours after midnight, the physician found Fatma in Are Gekelmisi, a dissociative state with injuries described as severe trauma consistent with forced penetration. She required treatment for bleeding, shock, and psychological collapse. Mustafa Pasha's later writings reveal his own devastation. There was no resistance. There was nothing. She was not there. I broke something already broken. He became increasingly withdrawn, dependent on opium, haunted by that single night. Fatma survived 29 more years, fulfilling her public duties, but hollowed from within. Those who knew her described a woman afraid of closed spaces, unable to tolerate the presence of men, speaking only in formal phrases. When her daughter neared marriage, Fatma begged Qasim Sultan to spare her. "Do not let them do to her what was done to me." Qasim refused. the cycle continued. Across 3 centuries, 243 imperial daughters were married off. Records show 60% developed severe melancholic disorders. 47 died on their wedding anniversaries. The archives remained sealed until 2019, when researchers uncovered the full system in clinical detail. The bride's pavilion was not an anomaly, but an extreme expression of a universal truth. Societies have long sacrificed their own daughters to preserve power, and until such systems are named and condemned, the echoes of their suffering remain.